Okay, so these slides are going to accompany chapter 23 of the textbook. Just like all of the chapters in this section, we have just the facts, argument analysis, and then we have these extra essays at the end of the textbook. I'm just going to talk about Corvino's and Brake's essays. So in terms of just the facts, sexual morality addresses the questions about the morality of various sexual acts and relationships. It talks about heterosexual versus homosexual sex, premarital sex, casual sex, incest, polyamory, and prostitution. There are many prohibitions around sex, and we're wondering, are these prohibitions real moral requirements, or are they just outdated taboos? So the liberal position says sex is morally permissible if and only if it is engaged in by consenting adults. So this is the way the argument goes. We are morally permitted to do what we want with other people so long as they provide informed consent to our treatment. All sexual activity except rape and sex with children can be performed by those giving informed consent. Therefore, all sexual activity except rape and sex with children can be morally permissible so long as their participants have given informed consent. So that's the liberal argument. This basically says that as long as you have adults and as long as they are consenting, anything goes. So looking at the second premise that says all sexual activity except rape and sex with children can be performed by those giving informed consent, that seems plausible. The first premise is a core but controversial liberal idea, which basically says that anything goes so long as people can consent to it. But it is supported by rule utilitarianism and the Kantian idea of autonomy. There are some other Kantian ideas it might not be happy with, but if we look at this, an objection to premise one, not all consensual acts are morally permissible. And he gives a whammy of an example here in the textbook. It's actually a real example. If you want to hear all the gory details of the example, I would point you to a recent set of episodes by the last podcast on the left. Fair warning, they're pretty gross. They go into a lot of detail, but also very entertaining if you're into that kind of thing. So this is a real case that happened. There was a German computer technician, Armin Mewes, who posted an ad seeking a willing volunteer for, quote, slaughter and consumption. He apparently found one, a man named Bernd Brandes, who answered the ad and allowed himself to be killed and eaten by Mewes. Although there was difficulty in determining whether Brandes really did consent to his death, let's just say that he did. Even so, most of us would recoil at the claim that what Mewes did was morally acceptable. But premise one says as long as everybody's on board with it, then it's morally permissible. All right, let's look at another argument, the family values argument. This one says that homosexual relations are contrary to family values. And if a practice is contrary to family values, then it is immoral. Therefore, homosexual relations are immoral. So, if we look at this argument a little closer, first of all, we have to figure out what are family values. What does that mean? So let's say family values means love, honesty, loyalty, and devotion. So you would hope to find that in any family, whether or not it is a heterosexual couple or a homosexual couple. Also, if it's having children, then people who are in homosexual marriages can also have children. And so it's really important to look at these and to consider what we're talking about when we use that kind of language. So here are some religious arguments about homosexual sex. Many have argued that homosexual sex is immoral because God forbids it, but that presupposes the divine command theory of morality, which says basically that what is moral is what God says it is. But even if that were true, you have to wonder, why would God prohibit homosexual sex? If God really does forbid homosexual sex, then there really must be good reasons for that. The opponent of homosexual sex must identify those reasons in order to give a good argument. So it's not enough, in other words, to say homosexual sex is bad because God forbids it. You have to come up with an independent reason why it's wrong. So John Corvino is one of the authors of one of the essays in this chapter, and he has his own website, and I encourage you, if you're interested, to go check out at least these two videos that he gave. They're really short, less than 7 minutes, usually closer to like 3 or 4. Really good stuff. He's very entertaining, and he's also super smart. All right, let's talk about the prostitution argument. This says that prostitution is morally acceptable only if the prostitute provides informed consent to selling sexual services. Adult prostitutes do not provide informed consent to selling sexual services. Therefore, adult prostitution is not morally acceptable. So this goes along with the liberal position. Remember, everybody has to be on board for that to be acceptable. Premise 1 is true. Prostitution is morally acceptable only if the prostitute provides informed consent to selling sexual services. And it seems like at least some prostitutes are okay with themselves selling sexual services. Some may not be. They may be coerced into that. They may be addicted to drugs, and so they can't make an informed decision. But if they're clear in their head and they, are saying, this is what I want to do, then premise 2 seems to have some problems with it. Let's look at the definition of marriage argument. This says, if marriage is, by definition, a relation between a man and a woman, then a homosexual relationship can never qualify as marriage. And marriage is, by definition, a relation between a man and a woman. Therefore, a homosexual relationship can never qualify as marriage. Well, let's look at it. Premise 1 is true. Premise 2 is pretty problematic. You can't just say that something is the way it is just by definition. Like, if marriage was, traditionally thought of as between one man and one woman, well, we're changing it now. We're changing the definition of marriage to include one man and one man, or one woman and one woman. The polygamy argument says, if same-sex marriage should be legalized, then we should also legalize polygamy. But we shouldn't legalize polygamy. Therefore, we shouldn't legalize same-sex marriage. Let's look at it. So this is an argument, we call this an argument by analogy. So it's comparing two things. So some reject premise 2 because they think we should actually legalize polygamy. But if we don't go that route, then we have to figure out what's the difference between same-sex marriage and polygamy. One possibility is that polygamy contributes to the oppression of women, whereas same-sex marriage does not. And that's an important distinction. There's another argument by analogy. The principle of equality says the government is morally required to provide all of its citizens with equal legal rights unless there is a compelling reason for the government not to do so. And defenders of same-sex marriage say that there's no compelling reason for withholding marital rights to homosexuals when granting them to heterosexuals. That doesn't seem fair. So if people disagree about that, then you have to find a really relevant difference between same-sex marriage and opposite-sex marriage that also provides a very strong reason to oppose the former while allowing the latter. So in Corvino's essay, it's called A Defense of Homosexuality. He says there are some considerations in favor of homosexual sex. It's pleasurable. It can express affection and intimacy. It allows a couple to bond. homosexual sex serves all the same functions as heterosexual sex, where one or both partners cannot procreate. So if one of the objections is it's bad because no children can result from sex in a homosexual union, well, that's also true, not to gross you out, Titans, but that's also true of my boyfriend and me because we're in our 50s. There's like no way we are making a baby. So does that mean that we shouldn't have sex? I would have a problem with that. So whenever there's a situation where you have a heterosexual couple that cannot, or that where one or both partners cannot make a baby, that's just the same as homosexual sex. So Corvino says at this point, homosexual sex should be considered permissible unless there are strong reasons against it. So here are some objections to homosexuality. One, it's unnatural. So Corvino gives 5 different senses in which things can be unnatural, and that goes back to one of the videos that I cited before. For any of these that he cites, either homosexuality is not unnatural or it's unnatural only in a morally irrelevant sense. One of his examples is if you woke up this morning to your phone alarm and not a rooster, you woke up to an unnatural cause, right? So it's kind of a silly example, but it's something to think about. Homosexual sex harms those engaged in it and or third parties. But Corvino says, no, it doesn't hurt the people who are engaged in it, and homosexual partners are no more likely to harm each other than heterosexual partners. So in other words, people who are in heterosexual relationships can hurt each other, yes, but homosexual partners, they can do that too, but not to like a greater degree than heterosexual partners. And homosexual sex is forbidden by biblical teachings. So Corvino says there's plenty of room within the framework of biblical interpretation for a view on which homosexuality is morally acceptable. And accepting homosexual sex puts one on a slippery slope, leaving us no principled reason for rejecting polygamy, incest, and bestiality. Remember, slippery slopes are fallacies. They are errors in argument. And so we don't want to use those to prove our points. We might want to condemn bestiality, and we might want to condemn polygamy, but they are not similar in relevant ways to homosexuality. All right, the other essay I want to look at is Break the Values of Polyamory. Polyamory is the practice of maintaining multiple loving and sexual relationships. It's best characterized by adopting and consequently acting on a set of core values, a core set of values and attitudes toward love and sex. These are non-possessiveness, communication, honesty, and critical reflection on the norms of monogamy. So this is different than polygamy, which involves marriage. So polygamy means literally many marriages. This is many loves. So these are situations where people are not monogamous, not having like a one-to-one relationship with somebody. They're having a relationship with more than one person. So here are some objections. So Kant would say you only want to have sex within a monogamous marriage because it is the kind of thing that involves a reciprocity necessary to avoid using others as a mere means. Remember, that's a total no-no in Kant's philosophy. But it's not clear that Kant's view precludes 3 people giving themselves to each other reciprocally in polyfidelity. So let's say there were 3 people. They're only having sex with each other. They're not having sex with other people. They're all into it. And so it doesn't seem like it would be that different. 2 people or 3 people, it doesn't seem like it would be that different. And why would consensual polyamory inevitably treat others as mere means? Polyamory is compatible with less stringent ethical demands, respect, consent, honesty, affection, and concern for others. They're all involved in polyamorous relationships. There's another objection. Is polyamory inherently wrong? Polyamorous relationships inherently have less value than monogamous relationships. For example, less love, affection, intimacy, emotional depth. But that falsely assumes that relations of love, affection, intimacy, and sex are a zero-sum game. Sharing love and affection among multiple children doesn't lessen the value of that love and affection, so why would it if you had multiple partners? But even if polyamory falls short with respect to certain values, it might surpass monogamy in terms of others, like that non-possessiveness thing. I find that to be like really, really an attractive feature of polyamory. I'm not polyamorous myself, but I think that's a very good ideal. And I think that a lot of people in monogamous cultures or monogamous unions can fall into that trap pretty easily. So is polyamory harmful? Well, polyamorous relationships harm children is an objection, but we don't have any empirical data. And multiple parenting might actually offer benefits. So there's more love for the child and there's more supervision. Polyamory reinforces gender inequalities and exploitation, but many polyamorous are explicitly feminist, rejecting monogamy norms they see as patriarchal. So monogamous marriage, at least, was sort of based on the idea that a woman passed from her father to her husband, which is a kind of a gross situation. So a lot of polyamorous are explicitly feminist, and they reject anything like that. Polyamory can create conflicts and unfair treatment among partners, but that can happen with any partnership. You would hope in a polyamorous situation, communication is, really, really important. So hopefully those kind of things wouldn't happen. The benefits of polyamory are honest communication is a foundational rule for polyamorous relationships. The ideal of non-possessiveness rejects relationship norms that treat partners as possessions who can be controlled. There's a respect for autonomy of partners and a rejection of sexual jealousy. Maybe we are naturally more polyamorous. I don't know. I think people are all different, and I'm not sure if we can generalize that much, but maybe we are all naturally polyamorous. I'm not sure. I'm not going to go through Nussbaum's essay, so I'm just going to cut it off here. Hope that was helpful. Let me know. Get in touch. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.